After Uncle Dalton's passing, a substantial sum of $23 million was discovered missing. Colby still remembered the lawyer's words as the will was read. He left a treasure, but only for the one who can find it. Many took it as a cruel joke, like something out of a B-movie. His cousin Brock even burst out laughing in the attorney's office, declaring the old man had finally lost his mind. But Colby knew his uncle better than anyone. Dalton Westbrook never joked about money and always had a purpose behind his actions. Colby, an ordinary history teacher in a Nebraska high school, seemed an unlikely candidate for a million-dollar treasure hunt. His days were spent teaching teenagers about the Civil War and grading papers often plagiarized from online encyclopedias. His biggest adventure was trying to make his paycheck last until the end of the month. Student loans relentlessly chipped away at his income. His car ran on a wing and a prayer, and his one-bedroom apartment rattled with a radiator that sounded like a resident ghost. Uncle Dalton was a larger-than-life figure. He was a true family legend, a man who had risen from poverty to the pinnacle of success. Starting as a ranch hand in Montana in the 60s, he worked his way up to foreman, then, thanks to a fortunate turn of events and a surge in beef prices in the 80s, bought his own cattle ranch. By 50, he owned significant real estate across 3 counties and had a fortune that seemed to exceed all his needs. Lawyers estimated his assets at $23 million. Dalton's life was notably reclusive. He lived alone on his sprawling 500-acre ranch, unmarried and childless. His only companions were his cattle and the ghosts that haunted the Montana hills. Family members rarely visited him, usually only when they needed money. They'd arrive with outstretched hands, ready to spin heartbreaking tales of their troubles. Aunt Lorraine would show up every few years, pitching surefire investment opportunities. Cousin Brock was perpetually concocting business ventures that just needed a small seed investment. Another cousin, Willa, raised 3 children by different fathers, and somehow Dalton was always expected to solve her problems. Colby's brother Deacon pursued gambling with the fervor of a religious zealot, finding meaning, purpose, and a sure way to lose everything he ever earned. Even Colby's parents, Warren and Judith, despite their kindness, would subtly hint at how nice it must be to have so much money just sitting around. Colby, however, visited Dalton not for the money, but because he genuinely liked the old man. Every Sunday, he'd make the 4-hour drive, one way, to play chess with him. They'd sit in Dalton's study, surrounded by expensive mahogany furniture and books probably worth more than Colby's car, playing game after game, listening to Dalton's tales of yesteryear. He taught Colby strategic thinking, how to anticipate an opponent's moves, and how to sacrifice pawns to protect the king. The last time Colby saw his uncle alive, Dalton grabbed his wrist as he was leaving. Dalton's grip was still strong for a 72-year-old. "Colby," he said, his shrewd blue eyes, which seemed to see through people, fixed on him. "Money reveals character faster than poverty. Remember that when I'm gone." Colby asked why he was saying that. Dalton replied, "Just promise me you'll pay attention. Very close attention. Not to what people say, but to what they don't say." 2 weeks later, Dalton passed away. The cause of death was listed as a heart attack. He was found slumped over the table in the very study where they played chess. The doctor said death was quick and likely painless. Colby, however, felt something was wrong. Dalton was healthier than many men half his age. He rode horses every morning, worked the ranch as if he were still 30, never smoked, and rarely drank. A heart attack seemed improbable. Uncle Dalton's sudden passing quickly devolved into a farce. Relatives who hadn't spoken to the deceased in years suddenly appeared at the funeral in mourning attire, shedding crocodile tears as if they'd lost their dearest friend. Brock, without shame, delivered a fawning eulogy about his uncle's generosity and care, a stark contrast to his recent insult when he'd called Dalton a selfish old geezer for refusing to fund his crypto startup just 6 months prior. However, the real spectacle unfolded during the reading of the will. Everyone gathered at Attorney Sterling Whitmore's office in Billings, Montana. Tension and avarice hung heavy in the air. It seemed every person present was mentally dividing $23 million by the number of potential heirs. Brock was already poring over luxury car catalogs on his phone. Willa whispered plans to send her children to private school. Aunt Lorraine sat with impeccable posture, her lips pursed as if she'd tasted something sour, likely calculating how much she deserved for being Dalton's sister. At that moment, Sterling Whitmore dropped a bombshell. Clearing his throat and adjusting his glasses, he read the will. The entire estate of Dalton Westbrook, valued at $23 million, shall be bequeathed to whoever proves worthy by finding it. The unworthy shall reveal themselves. The room erupted in outrage. Brock furiously hurled a coffee mug at the wall, leaving a brown stain that resembled a piece of modern art. Willa began shouting claims of legal rights and contesting the will. Aunt Lorraine threatened to sue everyone present, even the potted plant in the corner. Colby's parents sat stunned, their dreams of early retirement dissolving like morning mist. Colby, however, remained calm, pondering Dalton's words. Pay attention to what people don't say. Amidst the chaos and anger, he noticed something crucial. Attorney Sterling Whitmore was subtly smiling, as if he knew something hidden from the others, as if the game had just begun. Everyone else dismissed the will as a cruel joke, convinced the money was gone forever. They swarmed Dalton's ranch like locusts, turning everything upside down in search of clues. They ripped open mattresses, pulled up floorboards, and even dug holes in the yard, driven by the desperation of people who had already spent money they didn't yet possess. But Colby remembered the chess games with his uncle. Dalton never made a move without thinking several steps ahead. This was no accident. It was meticulously planned. And amidst the general pandemonium, Colby discovered what everyone else had missed. Coordinates carved beneath the chess table, right where Dalton's hand usually rested during their games. These numbers led him to a remote field in Montana, where, digging in the dark, he found not only millions in hidden assets, but also evidence revealing a terrible truth. It turned out Dalton hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd been murdered, and the murderers were right there in the same room, feigning grief while searching for the money they'd killed him for. Colby's discovery that night changed more than just his financial situation. It exposed a conspiracy rooted deeper than simple greed. It revealed the monsters hiding behind familiar faces, and it taught him that Uncle Dalton's final chess game was his masterpiece, where he, like a puppeteer, manipulated the pieces from beyond the grave to enact both justice and retribution. This is the story of how an ordinary Nebraska history teacher became a millionaire, exposed murderers, and understood that the real treasure wasn't money, but truth. And truth, as Dalton always said, always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. To understand how incredible these changes were, one must know who Colby Westbrook was before it all happened. A 34-year-old American history teacher at Franklin High School in Kearney, Nebraska. His daily routine was so predictable you could set your watch by it. Wake up at 6 a.m., shower with lukewarm water, thanks to the apartment's old water heater. Coffee at the same gas station where Marge invariably asked if he'd found himself a nice girl yet. Then a 15-minute drive to school in his 2008 Honda Civic, which made a terrifying screech with every left turn. His take-home pay was $2,847 a month. After student loan payments, rent, utilities, and groceries, he had about $200 left for everything else. A date meant pizza from Romano's, where they knew him by name and always gave him extra breadsticks because they felt sorry for him dining alone on Fridays. Colby wasn't destitute, but he wasn't truly living either. He was just surviving, and there was a huge difference. There's a fundamental line between living in abundance and living in scarcity. Uncle Dalton, a shrewd and wise man, had learned this truth firsthand long before wealth found him. Born in 1947 in the rural town of Billings, Montana, Dalton Westbrook began working with cattle at the tender age of 14. His father, my grandfather Theodore, suffered a crushing failure in a doomed mining venture in 1952, leaving the family ruined, burdened by debt and shame. Dalton, without hesitation, dropped out of school to toil on ranches, sending his hard-earned money home to help his mother feed the family. Colby, he once told me as we sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the mountain peaks crimson, I spent 20 years of my life with a bent back, manure on my boots, and dirt under my fingernails. And when I finally made my fortune, everyone suddenly remembered their family ties. That was Dalton's unique quality. He saw through people as if they were made of glass. Perhaps that's why he preferred a solitary life on his vast 500-acre Montana paradise, where the nearest neighbor was a long 7 miles away. He had a grand 12-room mansion he barely used, 3 sprawling barns, a stable with 8 thoroughbred horses, and a landscape that would make even God envious. Yet, he spent most of his time in his study, immersed in historical treatises and philosophical works, engaging in chess battles with himself, devising intricate combinations for games that existed only in his imagination. My relationship with Dalton was starkly different from his interactions with the rest of the family. It began when I was 12, at a family gathering that was essentially a thinly veiled attempt to persuade Dalton to share his newfound wealth. While the other relatives besieged him with outstretched hands, I found his chess set and became engrossed in playing by myself. Dalton, noticing me, watched for a while, then said, "You're playing the king's defense all wrong." "Then show me how," I replied. And for the next 22 years, he relentlessly did just that. Every Sunday, whenever possible, I made the pilgrimage from Nebraska to Montana, 4 hours one way, 8 hours round trip, to spend 3 precious hours playing chess and listening to his instructive stories. He taught me the art of sacrifice, strategic thinking, and the ability to foresee the consequences of my actions. But more importantly, he nurtured my character. "Your cousin Brock was here yesterday," he'd say, moving a bishop across the chessboard. "Asked for $50,000 for some promising venture. Couldn't clearly explain what it was, just assured me it would triple his investment. Did you give him the money?" Instead, I offered him a job, told him he could work on the ranch for the summer, earn an honest wage. Haven't heard from him since. That was Brock, a strapping 6'2" man, a former high school quarterback whose glory peaked at 18 and who spent the rest of his life futilely trying to recapture past greatness. He'd failed in 7 businesses in 10 years, each collapsing faster than the last. But according to him, everyone was to blame but himself. The market was unfavorable. The timing was wrong. His partners were incompetent. Everyone was at fault, except Brock. His sister Willa was little better, attractive enough to marry well, but not smart enough to do it wisely. 3 children by 3 different men. Each of her relationships ended in drama and legal battles. She homeschooled her children, which really meant they watched YouTube entertainment videos while she scrolled through Instagram, dreaming of a life that was always just out of reach. Then there was Aunt Lorraine, Dalton's younger sister, who wore bitterness like an exquisite perfume. She had married a banker who left her for his secretary, a cliché, really, and never remarried. In her mind, Dalton owed her for her humiliation, for her struggles, for his basking in luxury while she scraped by. She had a habit of bringing up his wealth in every conversation, like a knife she couldn't stop twisting. My brother Deacon discovered gambling the summer he turned 21. It started with innocent college poker tournaments, then moved to sports betting, and eventually, he'd bet on anything, the weather, reality TV show outcomes, which fly would leave the windowsill first. He owed significant sums to people whose business cards lacked last names, people for whom broken limbs were an effective negotiation tactic. An atmosphere of tension hung in the quiet study, like before a chess match where each player calculates moves and potential outcomes. Colby's parents, Warren and Judith, were ordinary working people, worn down by life's circumstances. His father worked at a grain elevator until back pain forced him to seek lighter work. Now, he toiled at Walmart, stocking shelves and trying to ignore the pain that shot through his spine with every heavy box he lifted. His mother cleaned houses for affluent families, returning with tales of luxurious interiors and modern appliances that were beyond their reach. They never directly asked Dalton for money, but often mentioned their struggles, hoping for his help. In the weeks leading up to his death, Dalton changed. He became distracted and pensive. During their chess games, he often glanced at the door, as if expecting uninvited guests. His hand trembled slightly as he moved pieces, and a few times he forgot his turn. "Is everything all right, Uncle Dalton?" Colby asked. "Just tired," he'd reply, but his eyes remained wary, as if scanning the room and calculating potential threats. "Colby, if anything happens to me, remember our games. Remember the chess combinations." "The Westbrook defense never fails." "The Westbrook defense? You mean that opening move you always make?" Colby clarified. "It's more than just an opening, son. It's a philosophy. You sacrifice little to protect what's most important. You let your opponent think they're winning while you prepare the decisive blow. That day, Dalton gripped Colby's hand tightly, holding it longer than usual. You're a good man, Colby. The only one in this family who visits me out of genuine affection, not for selfish reasons. That's more important than you think. Those were the last words Dalton ever spoke to Colby. 2 weeks later, a call came from Aunt Lorraine. Her voice was a mix of feigned grief and thinly veiled excitement. Dalton's dead, she announced. Heart attack, funeral Thursday, will reading Friday. Colby drove all night, unable to hold back his tears. He mourned not a lost inheritance, but the loss of the only family member who truly understood him. Dalton had been more than just an uncle to Colby. He was a mentor and a friend. He had taught him to value character over money and to believe that honesty always pays off. Standing by his grave, watching relatives in expensive sunglasses mentally calculate their future earnings, Colby realized Dalton's death seemed suspicious. A healthy man doesn't just die suddenly. A cautious man doesn't leave a multi-million-dollar estate without a clear plan. And a strategist like Dalton wouldn't end the game just because his heart stopped. In fact, the game was just beginning. Dalton had set the pieces on the chessboard and made his first move from beyond the grave. The Westbrook defense was in play, and Colby was the only one who understood its essence. Sterling Whitmore's law office was on 3rd Street in downtown Billings, nestled between a bail bondsman and a pawn shop, a seemingly symbolic location given the events about to unfold. On the day of the will reading, Colby arrived early, watching from his car as the relatives arrived, like vultures circling their prey. Brock pulled up in a rented BMW, already anticipating spending money he didn't yet possess. Willa emerged from her minivan, dragging 3 children who looked as miserable as their worn clothes. Aunt Lorraine arrived by taxi, in a black dress that probably cost more than Colby's monthly salary. A forced expression of grief was etched on her face. Whitmore's waiting room smelled of old leather and disappointment. The secretary, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, led everyone into a conference room with a long oak table and chairs that had seen better days. The relatives sat strategically. Brock took the head of the table as if he'd already inherited the throne. Lorraine sat to his right, clutching her purse like a weapon. Colby's parents modestly took seats at the far end, feeling awkward in their Walmart attire amidst the ostentatious display. Sterling Whitmore entered precisely at 10 o'clock, holding a manila folder that, judging by the gazes fixed upon it, seemed to be the Holy Grail. He was at least 70, and his cautious movement suggested he had been in this business long enough to know how a will reading could bring out the worst in people. Before we begin, he stated, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, I want everyone to understand that Dalton Westbrook's instructions were exceptionally clear and legally sound. What I'm about to read has been affirmed by 3 independent attorneys and is binding. Brock leaned forward impatiently. Just tell us how much we get. Whitmore's expression remained impassive. He deliberately slowly opened the folder, took out a sheet of paper, and began to read. I, Dalton Westbrook, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate, valued at $23 million, to whoever finds it. A silence hung in the room, lasting exactly 3 seconds. What the hell does that mean? Brock slammed his hand on the table, spilling Willa's coffee. Whitmore continued reading as if he hadn't heard him. My estate has been converted into an untraceable form. Cash, bonds, property deeds, all are securely hidden. Whoever proves worthy by finding it shall inherit all. The unworthy shall reveal themselves through their actions. Good luck. At that moment, chaos erupted in the room. And then a real scandal erupted. Willa, unable to contain herself, shrieked about child support, emphasizing her children's full right to their share of the inheritance. Lorraine, in response, threatened a lawsuit, citing Dalton's mental incompetence and questioning his sanity. Deacon, with a cynical smirk, muttered something about how the old man had managed to pull one over on them even after his death. Colby's father remained silent, but his hand visibly trembled, while his mother whispered prayers or perhaps curses. It was impossible to tell. Brock, jumping up, knocked over his chair and exclaimed, This is illegal. You can't do this. There are laws about inheritance, about family rights. Whitmore, maintaining his composure, countered, Actually, he can, and he did. The money was his property, and he had the right to dispose of it as he saw fit. He chose to make it a treasure hunt. Willa's voice, full of despair, asked, "Where do we even begin?" Whitmore replied, "That's for you to decide. The ranch is at your disposal for 30 days of searching. After that period, if no one claims the inheritance, it will be donated to various charities chosen by Dalton." Lorraine, crimson with rage, exclaimed, 30 days? Does he expect us to dig up 500 acres? Whitmore, showing emotion for the first time, replied, "I think Dalton knew exactly what he was doing." After those words, chaos reigned in the room. Brock, losing all composure, grabbed Whitmore by the lapels, but Deacon pulled him off. Willa's children burst into tears. Lorraine, wasting no time, called her lawyer on speakerphone right there in the room. Colby's parents looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear, as if their teacher's son could shed light on the unfolding madness. Within an hour, the entire family was at Dalton's ranch. The destruction began, masquerading as a search. Brock, armed with a sledgehammer, started smashing the walls of the main house, convinced a safe was hidden behind one of them. Willa, for her part, ransacked every book in Dalton's library, shaking them out, tearing out pages in search of non-existent clues. Deacon, with an enthusiasm worthy of a better cause, began digging holes in the yard. Lorraine adopted a different tactic. She cornered Colby in the kitchen while he tried to escape the madness with a cup of coffee. "You visited him every week," she said in a sly voice. "He must have told you something." Colby replied, "We played chess, that's all." Lorraine, disbelieving, countered, "Don't lie to me, Colby. I know he loved you. Always talked about his nephew, the teacher. So noble, so honest. It makes me sick. That's probably why he didn't leave you anything directly." Her face contorted with malice. "He was my brother. I deserve that money more than anyone. I suffered while he prospered. I struggled while he bathed in millions." Colby retorted, "You haven't spoken to him in 3 years except to ask for money. Did you visit him for his company? Please, you played a long game, but it didn't work. Now we're all in a bind." Lorraine left, but her words stuck in Colby's mind. Was he playing a long game? No. He genuinely loved the old man. But watching his family destroy his home, he felt anger. Dalton didn't deserve this treatment. These people didn't care about his death, only about the hidden money. At that moment, Colby retreated to Dalton's study. It was the only room not yet ransacked, likely because there was nothing overtly valuable: books, a chess set, and the massive mahogany table where they had spent so many Sundays. Colby sat in Dalton's armchair, whose leather still held the shape of his body, and tried to think like him. "The Westbrook defense," he murmured aloud, setting up the chessboard exactly as Dalton always did. King's pawn to 4, knight to f6. It was an unusual opening, provoking an attack while simultaneously preparing a counterattack. Sacrifice the expected to protect what's important. Colby ran his fingers along the edge of the table, feeling the grooves and scratches accumulated over decades of use. And then he felt them. Numbers, carved so subtly they were impossible to see unless you were looking, or rather, feeling. Dalton knew Colby always ran his fingers over the table, contemplating his next move. 45 to 78.2040 north latitude. 180.57 west longitude. Beneath the coordinates, a single word was carved, making Colby's heart quicken: patience. Tension hung in the air, taut as a bowstring. I heard approaching footsteps in the hallway and swiftly covered the carving on the table. Brock burst into the study, his expensive shirt damp with sweat, plaster dust clinging to his hair. "Well, cousin, found anything?" he asked. "Just memories," I replied, trying to sound calm. "Memories don't pay the bills. If you find something and try to hide it, we'll know," his voice warned. "Is that a threat, Brock?" I asked. He moved closer, and I felt the desperation radiating from him, like a sharp whiff of cologne. "It's a promise. We're family, Colby, and family shares. Unless you want to find out what happens when family feels betrayed." After he left, I sat in the study for another hour, pretending to examine books while my thoughts raced. I had the coordinates. I had a lead. But most importantly, a certainty grew within me that this wasn't just about hidden money. Dalton had been murdered, and I was sure of it now. The question was, who did it, And why had he hidden the evidence as a treasure hunt? The answer was carved right on the table: patience. Dalton was forcing his killer to reveal themselves, playing his final game, sacrificing his fortune to protect something greater: justice. Memorizing the coordinates, I grabbed the first book off the shelf and left the study. In the living room, Brock was furiously tearing up floorboards, while Lorraine directed the operation like a construction foreman. Willa had moved on to searching mattresses, and Deacon, who had somehow acquired a metal detector, was sweeping the grounds outside. "I'm heading back to Nebraska," I announced. "Need to prepare for classes next week." "Running away?" Brock didn't even look up. "I knew it." "Let him go," Lorraine replied. "More for us when we find it." I left the ranch, my heart pounding. I had the only real clue to $23 million, but more importantly, I had the key to a murder. The coordinates burned in my mind like a brand. Whatever Dalton had hidden, it wasn't just money, it was the truth, and someone in that house was willing to kill to keep it buried. The drive back to Nebraska was a 4-hour ruse. I drove the familiar route until I reached Sheridan, then turned onto Highway 14, constantly checking my mirrors to ensure I wasn't being followed by Brock's BMW or Lorraine's rental car. My phone vibrated continuously with messages in the family chat, each one more desperate and angry than the last. Willa claimed to have found something in the basement. Deacon said his metal detector was picking up signals all over the property, and Brock was accusing everyone of hiding discoveries. I silenced my phone and continued my journey. The coordinates led me to a place I'd heard of but never visited, an area near the ghost town of Whitetail, abandoned since the 1960s when copper reserves ran dry, leaving behind only the ruins of hopes. This was no coincidence. Dalton's father, Theodore, had invested all his money in a mining venture here in 1952, only to lose everything when it was revealed that the surveys were fraudulent and the copper veins long depleted. The family never recovered from that blow, and Dalton had dedicated his life to righting his father's wrongs. I stopped at an outdoor gear store in Hardin and bought what I needed with cash withdrawn from 3 different ATMs: a sturdy shovel for serious digging, a headlamp with extra batteries, work gloves, and a tarp. The teenager at the counter didn't even look up from his phone as he rang up my purchases. "Perfect." "Going camping?" he asked in a bored tone, something like that. The sun was setting as I reached the coordinates. The GPS led me down a dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance since Bush Sr. was in office. My Civic groaned and screeched, but I kept going until the road ended at a rusty gate with a "No Trespassing" sign peppered with buckshot. Beyond the gate stretched an empty field, yellow grass swaying in the Montana wind, mountains rising in the distance. I parked behind a cluster of cottonwood trees, hidden from the road. The temperature was dropping fast, the biting cold of the high desert piercing my jacket and reaching my bones. I put on my headlamp, grabbed the shovel, and rechecked the coordinates on my phone. The exact spot was 200 yards into the field, next to a lone juniper tree that seemed to have been fighting the wind for a century and losing. The ground was harder than I expected. The first foot took an hour, my hands blistering inside the work gloves. I thought of Dalton, a 72-year-old man who had done the same, digging in secret, probably at night, just like me. How long had he planned this? How many trips had he made? His efforts alone told me this wasn't just about hiding money. This was a man setting a trap for his killer. In the silence of the night, like a ghost, I continued to dig deeper into the earth, haunted by the specter of an unsolved case and the words of a departed friend. By midnight, the shovel was 3 feet deep, and despair began to creep in, like the winter cold. My back ached, my hands were covered in painful calluses, and doubts coiled in my mind like snakes. What if I had misinterpreted the coordinates Dalton left? What if this was just another fruitless chase after the ghosts of the past? At that moment, Dalton's words from one of our chess games resurfaced. The moment you feel like giving up is usually the moment victory is closest. That's when true character is revealed. Inspired by these words, I continued digging, pushing away fatigue and doubt. At 2:47 a.m., the long-awaited sound came. The shovel struck metal. The sound echoed across the desolate field, like a funeral bell announcing the end of the search. Dropping to my knees, I began to clear the dirt with my hands until I uncovered an army ammunition box, similar to those found in any military surplus store. However, the lock on the box was unusual, a digital one, with a keypad emitting a cold blue glow as I brushed off the last clumps of dirt. 4 digits, like a challenge, beckoned to me. First, I tried the obvious combinations. Dalton's birthday, 0447, April 1947, his death date, the ranch address, even my own birthday, though that seemed presumptuous. But all attempts were futile. The lock was programmed with a 3-second delay between attempts, making random guessing virtually impossible. Leaning back on the pile of excavated earth, I sank into thought. "Remember our games?" Dalton's words echoed in my mind. "The Westbrook defense never fails." The Westbrook defense was an unusual chess opening he always used. King's pawn to 4, then knight to f6. But how could that be converted into numbers? Suddenly, it hit me. He didn't just make moves, he always announced them using chess notation. King's pawn to 4 was written as e4 and f6 in standard notation. However, Dalton used the old descriptive notation, the kind found in chess books published before 1970. In that system, his opening move would be written as pk4 nkb3. But these still weren't numbers. And then I remembered a Sunday when he showed me his first chess book, a worn copy of Modern Chess Openings from 1947, his birth year. In the margins next to his favorite opening were some notes. Numbers, board coordinates, but not in modern algebraic notation, rather in an old numerical system where each square had a number from 11 to 88. "See this, Colby?" he'd say. "My father taught me to play chess using this system. Everything on the board has a number. Your position isn't just where you are, but what number you represent in this system." The Westbrook defense opening could be translated into specific square numbers. E4 corresponded to square 54 and F6 to square 66, but these were only 2 digits. Then I remembered he always made the same second move, bishop to G5, which corresponded to square 75. And he always castled on the 4th move, which resulted in the king being on square 71. I tried 54-66, no luck. I tried 75-71, failed again. And then another memory struck me. Dalton always said 1947 was the year everything changed, not just because he was born, but because that's when his father first tried to make his fortune. The year before, he lost everything. 1947. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, everything was meticulously wrapped in plastic, protected from moisture and time. $100,000 in cash bound in stacks of 10,000. 5 property deeds for buildings in Denver I'd never heard of. Bank documents for accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore, for sums that made my teacher's salary seem like a meager handout. And at the very bottom, 2 envelopes, one labeled "Read First," the other "Evidence." My hands trembled as I opened the first letter. Dalton's handwriting was as clear and precise as his chess moves. "Colby, if you are reading this, it means you did exactly what I knew you would. You watched while others destroyed. You thought while others grabbed. You remembered our games while they forgot everything but greed. The money is yours, every last cent, legally and completely. The accounts are in your name, properly registered with the IRS, taxes paid. But money is not the real treasure. Open the other envelope and you will understand why I had to hide everything, why I had to make them show their true colors, and why I chose you to finish the game I started." In the silence of the night, I paused, ready to examine the evidence, but the sound of an approaching car disrupted my plans. Headlights swept across the field, confirming my suspicions of being followed. I hastily gathered the box's contents, extinguished my lamp, and hid. 2 figures emerged from the car, their voices carrying on the night air. "Brock, his car's here. I told you he found something." Then, Aunt Lorraine's chilling voice spoke. "Good. We'll repeat the Dalton scenario. Make it look like natural causes. Heart attacks run in the family." Pressed into the cold earth, I realized I held not just $23 million, but evidence of murder. And the murderers were approaching, ready to add another victim to their list. The Westbrook defense took on new meaning. Now I was protecting not just chess pieces, but my own life. Dalton, even in death, had provided me with the tools for victory. Activating the voice recorder on my phone, I prepared to make the decisive move in this deadly game. As Brock's and Lorraine's flashlights swept the field, I made a decision. Fleeing would confirm their suspicions and provoke a chase. Instead, I applied Dalton's lesson, sacrifice the expected to protect what's important. Quickly photographing the documents, I uploaded them to cloud storage and stood up, shining my headlamp directly at the approaching murderers. "Hey guys, what are you doing out here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. They stopped, stunned. Brock recovered first. "We could ask you the same, cousin. Thought you were heading back to Nebraska." I did, but then I remembered Dalton's words about this place. Decided to check if he'd hidden anything here as a joke. You know his love for puzzles. Lorraine approached, her flashlight illuminating the hole. "And you brought a shovel?" "There was a sale at the hardware store." I tried to keep my voice even. "Found an old box, but it only had cash. Maybe 100,000. We can split it 3 ways." 100,000? Dalton wouldn't hide chump change. What else did you find? Brock laughed humorlessly. "Nothing. See for yourselves." I stepped back, revealing the empty hole in the discarded box. The rest was in my backpack, but they didn't need to know that yet. Lorraine walked to the edge of the hole, peering in. "You dug 6 feet for 100,000? That's too much work for a third of that amount." "Well, I hoped for more." She turned, her face looking sinister in the flashlight beams. "You know, Colby, I think you found exactly what Dalton wanted you to find. You're lying to us, just like he lied about everything." "He never lied to me." "No? Did he tell you how he made his first million?" "Your precious uncle wasn't some business genius. He just got lucky. Right place, right time, right connections. And instead of sharing that luck with family, he hoarded it." Brock circled behind me. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to give us everything you found. Then you're going to have an accident. Came out here alone, fell into a hole, hit your head. Sad story." "Like Dalton's heart attack?" I asked, and the murderers froze. "What did you say?" Lorraine whispered. I pulled out the envelope labeled evidence and held it up to the light. "Before you do anything foolish, know that I've already uploaded everything to the cloud. Photos, documents, everything." "You're bluffing," Brock said, but uncertainty laced his voice. "Me? Perhaps I should read you Dalton's letter, where he details how you poisoned him? Or should I go straight to the video evidence?" I opened the envelope, pulling out a USB drive and a stack of papers, medical reports with Dalton's name, toxicology results showing high levels of arsenic dated 2 months before his death, photos of Brock adding something to Dalton's coffee, bank records indicating transfers from Lorraine's account to a chemistry student, Kyle Morrison, who dealt in untraceable poisons. "He knew," I said, watching their reactions. "He knew you were killing him, and he let it happen. Want to know why?" Lorraine lunged for the papers, but I stepped back. "Because he needed you to think you'd won, to expose yourselves. Every visit you made when you slipped poison into his coffee, he recorded it. Every phone call where you discussed the plan, he listened. He documented everything." "Impossible," Brock muttered. "We were careful." "You were greedy. There's a difference." I pulled out another document. "This is his real will. It was filed with another attorney 2 weeks before his death. All property goes to charities unless his death is ruled a murder. In that case, everything goes to whoever brings the murderers to justice, which is me." "You set us up?" Lorraine snarled. "No, Dalton set you up. I'm just finishing his game." I held up my phone, showing the recording was still active. "And you just confessed. We'll do it the same way we did Dalton." "That's what you said when you walked across the field. It's all recorded." Brock lunged at me, but I was ready. I dodged, and Brock's momentum carried him directly into the dug hole. He screamed, his ankle snapping. Lorraine pulled a syringe from her purse, likely the same poison they'd used on Dalton. "Think you're so clever?" "Your uncle thought so too, but clever doesn't stop a heart attack, does it?" "No," I replied, stepping back. "But the Montana State Police do." Sirens tore through the night. 3 cars with flashing lights sped across the field. I had called them beforehand, told them everything, and sent copies of the evidence. They had been waiting, listening to my every word through the phone connection with Detective Vera Blackstone. "Drop your weapons," the detective's voice commanded. Lorraine threw the syringe to the ground. "Colby Westbrook, you're just like him, smug and cruel." "No, I'm exactly like him. I protect what's important." Police arrested Lorraine, reading her rights while she cursed everyone and everything. Then they pulled Brock from the hole. He tried to cut a deal, offering to testify against Lorraine for a reduced sentence. Detective Blackstone approached me. "Your uncle was a smart man. He came to us 6 weeks ago with his suspicions, but we didn't have enough evidence. He said he had a plan." His murder was part of the plan? Death was inevitable anyway. The poison had already started working. He knew he had no more than 2 months to live and decided to use his death to catch his murderers. She handed me a business card. "The district attorney will want to speak with you. With your evidence and their confession, they're facing life in prison." Left alone, I pulled the last item from the evidence envelope, a note from Dalton. "Checkmate in 4 moves, Colby. They thought they were winning when they'd already lost. Use the money wisely. Create something important. And remember, the best victories are those where the opponent defeats themselves. Thank you for being the son I never had. Thank you for seeing me as a man, not a source of income. Your character is worth more than any fortune, but the fortune is still yours. You earned it by being exactly who you are. $23 million, real estate in multiple states, accounts worldwide, all of it now legally belong to me. But sitting in the field, holding the evidence that would send murderers to prison forever, I realized Dalton had given me something more than money. He had given me a chance to prove that character matters, that justice exists, and that sometimes the good guys win because they're willing to play the long game. I gathered my things, filled the hole, and drove towards the rising sun. Ahead lay trials, testimonies, and legal procedures. But first, I had to keep a promise. Dalton's will stipulated that $10 million was to go to rural education. I resolved to ensure every penny reached children who, like Dalton, were smart but poor, strategic but limited in opportunity. The Westbrook defense had worked perfectly. By sacrificing himself, Dalton had protected his legacy, exposed his murderers, and ensured his fortune would be used for creation, not destruction. It was the greatest chess match, and it had been my honor to make the final move. The legal battle stretched on for 3 long months. On the stand, Brock and Lorraine remained estranged, like strangers, their lawyers pursuing separate defense strategies that essentially amounted to mutual accusations. Prosecutor Janet Chen, a woman with the polite demeanor of a librarian, but the predatory instincts of a shark, meticulously presented irrefutable evidence against the accused. The court was presented with surveillance footage showing Brock purchasing arsenic under a false name. Lorraine's phone conversations were also revealed, in which she discussed inheritance tax matters, not shying away from speculating on lethal dosages. Bank statements indicated that the criminal plot had been brewing in their minds for 3 long years, ever since Dalton refused to fund Brock's 5th failed business idea. When I testified, Lorraine pierced me with a gaze so full of furious hatred that its burning heat seemed palpable. Brock, meanwhile, didn't even grant me a glance. During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to portray me as a cunning manipulator who had convinced a dying old man to slander his own family. However, the jury did not fall for the trick. The evidence presented was too compelling, too detailed, too precisely aligned with Dalton's plan. "Your uncle was a man of exceptional meticulousness," Janet Chen declared in her closing statement. "He documented his own murder with the precision of a scientist and the foresight of a chess grandmaster. He understood that for justice to prevail, irrefutable evidence was needed, and obtaining that evidence required boundless patience." After 2 hours of intense deliberation, the jury returned their verdict, guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, criminal conspiracy, attempted murder, for their sinister plans against me in that very field. Lorraine was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Brock received 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years, provided good behavior, which, knowing him, was hard to believe. The day after the verdict, I found myself in another lawyer's office, far cozier and more respectable than Sterling Whitmore's. Marshall Davis specialized in estate planning and charitable foundations. He helped establish the Dalton Westbrook Education Fund, which was endowed with $10 million and designed to provide scholarships to gifted rural students from Montana, Wyoming, and Nebraska. Children with sharp minds but limited means, ambitious but facing difficult circumstances, much like Dalton himself once was. "You could have kept all this money for yourself," Marshall remarked, reviewing the foundation documents. "By law, It's your right. It was never about keeping it all for myself, I replied. It was about protecting this money from the unworthy and giving it to those who truly need it. My parents immediately retired. I bought them a small house in Florida. Nothing extravagant, just a comfortable 2-bedroom home where my father wouldn't suffer back pain from the cold, and my mother could grow her beloved tomatoes year-round. At first, they protested, saying it was too much, but I reminded them of the countless sacrifices they had made to ensure Deacon and I had all the necessary school supplies, clothes, and opportunities to thrive. This isn't charity, I told them. This is justice. You worked your entire lives for others. It's time to rest and live for yourselves. Deacon was a much harder case. Money could solve his financial problems related to gambling addiction, but it couldn't cure the destructive passion itself. I paid for his rehabilitation at a prestigious clinic that actually addressed underlying psychological issues rather than just isolating patients for 30 days. Deacon has been clean for 6 months now and works as a counselor at the same rehab center. It turns out, former addicts make the best guides for those still lost in the dark woods of addiction. Willa, however, presented a genuine surprise. When she learned of Brock's and Lorraine's transgressions, she was morally crushed. Not so much because they were behind bars, but from the realization of how toxic their family had become. She used a small inheritance from an insurance policy Dalton had taken out years ago to move her children to a better neighborhood with a good school. She herself returned to college to earn a teaching degree. Sometimes we meet for coffee, 2 educators striving to break the vicious cycle of greed that had nearly destroyed their family. I continue my teaching career, finding meaning and purpose in it, despite lacking financial necessity. My students see me as a passionate history teacher, striving to prepare them for the future, unaware of my multi-million-dollar fortune. I perform anonymous acts of kindness, paying off school lunch debts and purchasing a small ranch where I establish a library and chess pavilion for local children, naming it after Dalton Westbrook, emphasizing the importance of character as the true legacy. Every Sunday, I indulge in chess, playing by myself or with visitors, always starting with the Westbrook defense. I remember Dalton, a man who turned his death into a victory, used his fortune as bait to catch murderers, and entrusted me to complete the game he started. The millions I received changed my life, but didn't bring happiness. Rather, they bestowed responsibility and provided resources to help others. Every scholarship, every student educated through the Westbrook Fund, every family supported in a difficult moment is Dalton's true legacy. Sterling Whitmore, Dalton's attorney, sent me a photo of us playing chess, reflecting our shared understanding that the game isn't about winning or losing, but the process and the knowledge gained. Brock, from prison, asks for money, claiming his rebirth, but I ignore his pleas. Lorraine, unlike him, remains true to her hatred. I conclude that money is merely a tool, one that can be used for creation or destruction. Dalton understood this and left his fortune not to blood relatives, but to someone who would use it for good. The treasure wasn't in the hidden field in Montana, but in the test itself, revealing everyone's true character. I feel no guilt for Brock's and Lorraine's fate, as they made their own choices, preferring greed over family and murder over patience. I merely provided the evidence of their crimes. A letter from a student who received a Westbrook Fund scholarship reminds me of the purpose for which Dalton played his last game. Dalton believed money revealed character faster than poverty, but I add that it is choices that shape it. Every act of help, generosity, and creation matters in the long game of life. Teaching history, I share with my students the importance of character and the impact of choices on one's destiny. I realize that true wealth is measured not by money, but by the lives you change, the justice you serve, and the character you build. Dalton taught me that the best inheritance is the wisdom and courage to use money for good. The Westbrook defense worked perfectly. Dalton sacrificed his life to protect his legacy, expose the monsters in his family, and ensure a constructive future for his fortune. It was checkmate in 4 moves, and it was my honor to make the final move in this greatest chess match.